As our country descends deeper into polarization and paralysis, is there any hope for a United States of America? Renowned psychologist Jonathan Haidt studies the patterns of thinking that have led to such sharp divisions in America and provides a vision for how the country might move forward. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Walter. Pleasure to be talking with you.
So, John, you're a social psychologist and specifically with an expertise in moral psychology. Mm-hmm. Help us understand what exactly you do.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So as a psychologist, I'm interested in how the human mind works. And my particular area is how it works in relation to morality, norms, virtues, the expectations we have with each other. These are the foundations of society. Humanity is unique not because we're strong or fast or have big teeth, but because we have culture and we're able to create moral communities. And that has a kind of a magic that it creates wealth and comfort and safety for us. And when we get that right, a society flourishes. When we get it wrong, you can have terrible things happening. So that's what I study, and I've been doing that since graduate school in 1987. And then more recently, beginning in the early 2000s, as America got more polarized, I shifted over from morality in general to why is it that left and right don't understand each other, often hate each other. They're both right about different things. What's going on there? So I've been studying political polarization since the early 2000s and ways to overcome it.
All right, I want to jump right into that then. In your landmark work, 2012, The Righteous Mind, you have the subtitle, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. So why are good people divided by these issues?
Because the secret of our success is forming communities that are bound together, ideally or prototypically by something sacred. And this is why I think you can't understand politics until you understand religion. Of course, there's even research showing that chimpanzees have politics. They're coalitions. So the idea of a group versus a group, that has been around for a very, very long time in evolutionary history. But something happened to humans. We have the ability to make something sacred. In many societies, it's a rock or a tree or a river or land or a person or a book. Once we make something sacred, then that community circles around that. Unfortunately, we can't do this as a species. There's not like a thing that all of humanity can circle around. Until we're invaded by extraterrestrials, we have a long, drawn-out Hollywood-style battle. The situation we face is that we can create ordered communities at a local level, and sometimes it can rise to the level of a nation. Often it does, but it's hard to go beyond nation. And then even within a nation, you have all kinds of splits and divisions. Those splits and divisions can be constructive. People can engage with each other across lines of diversity in ways that enrich each other, but they can also easily flip over into hatred and violence.
Why do we need to get into those kind of tribes or localized communities in the first place?
Well, bird gotta fly, fish gotta swim, human gotta be a group member. There are some individuals that are islands or that don't want to be part of a group, but very few. Almost all of us. I mean, look at kids. So I'm studying adolescent development a lot now and what social media is doing to it. What kids are most afraid of is not losing their phone. It's being the only one who doesn't have a phone. It's being cut off. That is death. And so this is just a part of human nature, I argue, is we are tribal. The word I use in the book is groupish. We're focused on groups. We think about groups. We want to be members of groups. And again, that's mostly incredibly healthy. And it allows us to cooperate at a level, here we are, you and I are cooperating. There's a team behind each of us. None of us are related by blood. We don't share a religion. But we're able to cooperate based on our common culture. Now, of course, religious communities are able to get much higher levels of cooperation than secular communities, and this in general. And this has proved incredibly protective for adolescents. I hope we'll come back to this issue about my most recent book, The Anxious Generation. But what we're finding is that kids raised in religious communities, especially conservative religious communities, were to a large extent protected against the tidal wave of depression and anxiety that swept through the developed world around 2012. When all the kids got online, when they all had a smartphone and social media and they stopped seeing each other in person very much, it was the kids who were bound into religious communities. It was almost as if the tidal wave came and they had roots. And a lot of the other kids didn't have roots. They got washed out to sea. They have a sense of meaninglessness. So I'm very interested in the psychology of religion, in religious communities. And I've had that interest for a long time, just, professionally and personally. But now that I'm studying adolescent development, I think religious communities have a lot to teach us about how do you create a binding, meaning-giving community in a world that's kind of losing its mind.
John, you described the situation of having roots. It reminds me of a teaching of Jesus when he uses this illustration that you can build your house on sandy ground and it will be swept away, or you can build it on solid rock and it will remain sturdy. And I'm going to swing certainly back to this issue of the impacts of social media on our youth and society more largely, but I'd like to set up the tensions that we are experiencing right now before we get to that deeper dive. And that is, okay, we have this explanation of why we want to get into tribes. This is how we're wired to be in groups. That doesn't quite explain then why those groups would then choose to fight each other as opposed to collaborate on a common cause.
So let's start by looking at, again, children at play. And you see this more clearly with boys than girls. But if you let kids do whatever they want, the boys are going to spontaneously organize themselves into teams to compete. It's fun. It's pleasurable. You look at college kids, boys and girls go off to college. What do? They don't just study. They want to, a lot of them join sports teams, maybe the official university sports team. Or maybe it's an intramural sports league that they organize themselves. A lot will join fraternities and sororities. We are groupish creatures. You have to start there. We are groupish. We have needs for groups. If we're denied groups, we're unhappy. So kids will seek out a group, and they're very anxious. I just dropped my son off at college a few days ago. There's so much anxiety among all these incoming freshmen about, will I find my group? Who will be my group? So we need it the way birds need nests. And that's just part of our nature. So I just take that as a given. Now, the fact that competition is enjoyable to a certain point explains why even within a company, they'll organize, maybe a competition between two departments for either productivity or maybe for fundraising or maybe in a sports league. Like it's fun. And what competition does, a lot of people don't seem to understand this. When you divide people up into teams, you get a big increase in love of the in-group. Everyone gets that. But surprisingly, you don't usually get an increase in hostility for the out-group. So intramural competition, healthy competition, gives you a group that you're bonded to, you have something in common with, you're fighting for a common purpose, but you don't really hate the other team. They're your opponents, but you don't hate them. Okay, now, why are we like this? The argument that I give in The Righteous Mind is that we evolved in part by a process of group selection, a group level selection. So you and I are not just the products of the individual ancestors who made the best choices and went on to have children. We're the product of the groups that held together and kept the territory or didn't get defeated in war. Almost all the lineages of humans from 200,000 years ago are gone. They're almost all wiped out. It's those that could hold together in groups, and I believe religion was a big part of that. Now, again, this may be an area that I may differ with you and your audience. As I say in my books, I'm Jewish. I'm also more or less an atheist. In Judaism, you can be, culturally and philosophically, and I belong to a synagogue, but we don't have quite the same issues around faith and belief as is found in Christianity. So I'm a Jewish atheist, you might say, with tremendous respect for religion. I think that we evolved to be religious. And so that's what I do in The Righteous Mind, is I'm trying to track that down. And that led me very much to see us as groupish. Groups compete with groups. We can cooperate or we can fight. And we're kind of on a hair trigger. It's very easy to descend into fighting. It's very hard to overcome that and get back into peace, as we're seeing in the Middle East, as we're seeing in so many parts of the world. But the thing is, we're groupish, and that doesn't mean that we're always fighting. We're not. Traditional societies, it's almost all trade and cooperation, but then sometimes you get war.
So you followed up with The Righteous Mind, Why We're Divided, with a series of other books that argue, and articles that argue and explore more deeply the tensions that exist between a liberal mindset, a conservative mindset, these different groups that are, it seems now, almost in an intractable impasse of conversation. Like, what is going on with that?
Yeah. So when I wrote The Righteous Mind around 2010 to 2011, I was writing it. That was the old world that doesn't exist anymore. Everything's changed since the early 2010s. But in the old world, which your older listeners will remember, there was a party on the right that was conservative and talked about conservative things, and there was a party on the left that had some connection to liberalism, and you could accuse the other side of betraying their principles, but there was a recognizably conservative element and a recognizably progressive or liberal element. And what I saw when I was writing the book was you actually need both. You need the creative tension of both. You need, in every society, there are always some people who are saying, our problems are because we have betrayed the old ways. We've betrayed the ancestors. We must return to the wisdom of our ancestors. And there's a group that says, no, we have to knock this down, start fresh. We need to change. That's why we're having problems. And that's the conservative and progressive impulse. And that's highly heritable. If you have identical twins separated at birth, and one is very progressive, very much on the left, odds are the twin that she's never met is also on the left, and same thing for the right. So this is one of the big discoveries in the 80s and 90s, that almost every personality trait, including politics, is heritable. And so what this means is when you get some people who just, like what Robert F. Kennedy, some people see, I don't remember the exact quote, but the point is, we can dream about a better world. That's the progressive impulse. And the conservative impulse goes back to Edmund Burke, through National Review and standing athwart history, yelling stop. It's like a gas pedal and a brake. So if you have that in a society and they're in healthy tension, that's actually the best. That's the best for a modern democratic society, I believe. But what has happened is, beginning in the 90s, polarization began rising. The degree to which each side hated the other. It used to be very common to vote, to split your ticket, to vote for one party for president, different party for senator. It used to be very common to not care what politics your kids married into. In the 60s, there was a survey, how much would it bother you if your child married a Democrat or a Republican? Didn't really matter. Different religion? Oh, that matters. Different race? Oh, that matters. And now it's the reverse. Now, people care much less about whether your child marries someone of a different race. They care much less about whether it's someone of a different religion. But boy, do they care about politics. And this is not everyone. But this has been a shift. You could almost say our primary allegiances used to be to country and religion, and now it's to party. And that's really bad. So what I see happening since the early 2010s, as social media has super empowered the extremes. There have always been extremes on the far left, far right. But now those extremes are armed with Twitter and Facebook and YouTube videos. And they have an enormous megaphone now, and they can intimidate people, and they can intimidate the party leaders, and they can intimidate dissent, and they can destroy centrists who seem to be arguing for moderation. So we have the progressive wing. There's not so much about the Democratic Party, but progressives, especially in a lot of our institutions, I work in universities, the progressive movement is incredibly illiberal. Attacking people for speaking truth, attacking people for just any deviance from the accepted position. It's incredibly illiberal. And the far right, the MAGA movement, I believe, there's no connection to Edmund Burke. There's no connection to the wisdom of conservatism. The far right is radical too. There are elements there that want to burn things down, change things, change our form of government. So I think we're in trouble as a country because the healthy tension between the progressive personality, progressive impulse, and the conservative impulse, both of which I have respect for, both of which are healthy, we've lost that. And now it's the far left and the far right, and most of us are in the middle somewhere. Most of us in the middle, and we're just kind of keeping our heads down, because if you say anything, you might get your head blown off, metaphorically.
John, you've given us a lot, and I want to unpack several things. First, why did politics enter into this central role when it didn't have that? Like, what were the conditions that gave rise to that?
Yeah. One way of approaching it, what I've tried to do in some of my writings, is to get people to start by marveling at the United States as that it exists at all. It shouldn't be possible to have a country like ours. Traditionally, throughout history, societies have been held together by shared gods, shared blood, and shared enemies. That's a normal, easy way to hold a group together for a few centuries, maybe. Maybe you have an empire that lasts 500 years. But America didn't have any of those things. Now, of course, religion, the Christian religion, originally Protestantism, then Christianity, including, so Christianity played a huge role, of course, in the sentiment, the general orientation of the founding fathers. So we did get a lot from the Judeo-Christian, but especially specific Christian tradition in this country. But what I want to get people to marvel at is a large, secular, diverse country should not exist. It should break apart. That's the way of things. Now, if it doesn't break apart, you have to understand, well, why didn't it break apart? What's holding it together? So what are the centripetal forces that are binding it together? And what are the centrifugal forces that are blowing it out? And if the centripetal forces exceed the centrifugal, it'll hold together. But if the centrifugal forces get stronger while the centripetals get weaker, it'll come apart. So what a lot of us alive today don't understand is just how important World War II was in the American psyche. Before that, there was the frontier. There were all sorts of things that were big missions and big things that America did. And of course, the Civil War divided us. But World War II shaped everyone who remembered it. My parents were teenagers during the war. And it just shaped everything. Everyone was pitching in for the war effort. And that generation became what we call the greatest generation. And they were great citizens. They had a sense of civic duty. They had a sense of restraint. They were generally religious, patriotic. So we had all these things were binding us together. We also had very low immigration. We closed off immigration in the 1920s. And while immigration and diversity are good for the economy, they lower cohesion and trust unless you'd have a lot of assimilation. So we had a lot of things pulling for us in the post-war world that we felt like, this is easy. Democracy is easy. We're just going to export it everywhere. We'll export it to Iraq. Just, let them vote and they'll be Democrats. They'll have a democracy, we thought. But it's not like that. It takes a lot to hold a country together. And what we've been experiencing since, I would say, the 90s is the enormous increase of forces blowing us apart and the decrease of forces holding us together. So the loss of the greatest generation is a big one. As long as people who remembered World War II were at the helm, we were fine. But they started aging out and disappearing in the 90s. The change of the media environment. For a while, we had this unnatural situation where there were 3 television stations, and they were very powerful. There were a couple of big newspapers. In the early days of the Republic, it wasn't like that. There were hundreds of newspapers, all full of lies. We had a period where the media environment was centralizing, and everyone got their news from Walter Cronkite. We were all on the same page. That begins to go away with cable TV and then with the internet. So now everything is narrowcasting. So we lose that. We have big increases in immigration and an opposition on the left to assimilation. So, my grandparents came from Eastern Europe, like many American Jews, around 1907. My wife's parents came from Korea in the 1950s, and 60s rather. And both of our sets of parents loved America, loved assimilating. My parents they were Jewish, they were Korean, but they were American. And now there's much more of a force coming from the left saying, no, assimilation is, is trying to kill people's culture. No, we must not make people assimilate. That's, I think, a really bad idea. So anyway, just to bring this to a close, I think we had a period in the post-war world where the centrifugal forces were so strong, but now, the centripetal forces holding us together were so strong, but now we're losing it. And so I think we are in danger of coming apart.
So why politics then entering into that kind of vacuum? And why does politics not only enter into that vacuum, that's part A, but eventually I'm going to want to hear, like, why then politics would have this negative instead of a positive impact as it fills that void?
Yeah. So there are a number of reasons why politics became more important. For one, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party used to overlap a lot. There were progressive Republicans, there were conservative Democrats, especially in the South. So there was a lot of overlap between the parties, and they weren't radically far apart. But we begin getting more of a separation. The Republicans begin moving right with Ronald Reagan. He forms a new coalition of the business people, religious Christians, and working class, so working class people who used to vote Democrat. So we get a reorientation in the 80s, and now both conservatism and sort of free market ideology become much more important on the right. On the left, you have the rise of all the identity politics movements, and so the way that John Kennedy or Harry Truman were on the left in a sense, but they were not really much on the left. They were Democrats, but they could be strong internationally. They weren't about identity. So the Democratic Party converts over to being more about identity, and race and gender and a few other topics. So they're philosophically much further apart. That's one reason why. Whereas when they overlapped, it didn't make sense to hate people who were voting for the other party. That's one. At the same time, as this becomes more vivid, religion is declining slowly until the early 2010s. And like so many other things, everything goes crazy in the early 2010s because we're rewiring life. Everyone's spending a lot of time online. No one has time to look anyone in the eye. We're all doing this. We all have millions of notifications coming in. So we see, for example, a huge drop-off in church attendance in the 2010s. It's not linear. It's not just like a slow decline over decades. It's sort of a slow decline and then a very fast decline in the 2010s. I saw a really stunning statistic that people are having less sex. And even married people, if you look at married people in their 30s who are having a fair amount of sex, they live together, they're still relatively young. Even married people are having less sex since the early 2010s because no one has time. Everyone's doing this all day long. Everyone's got their notifications coming in. So what I'm trying to say here is that we got, with the loss of things that used to give us meaning, especially religion and a sense of national pride, and we have much more local, curated for us on our phone, and we get the rise of this really nasty culture war, which has its roots in the 70s, but really begins to explode in the 90s, and now it's just all consuming. So that's my quick analysis of like how we got to this place where 20 years ago it wasn't like this.
And so, the subtitle that you had in 2012 of Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, that's a sober question to ask. And a decade later, I note that 2022 article you wrote in The Atlantic, Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. That is much more alarming in how it sounds.
Yeah, no, it is. So I study morality and how it varies by culture. That's what I've done since graduate school. And I shifted over to studying how it varies by politics in the early 2000s. And I wasn't terribly alarmed. I thought, this is bad. We have this polarization. We need to resist it. But, America's gone through periods of ups and downs, and, this will pass. But now I'm much more concerned. And the point of that article, that Atlantic article, was, and again, I sound like a broken record here, but something changed in the early 2010s, and it was when everything moved on to smartphones and social media, the things connecting us. It's almost like, imagine that, you're trying to fireproof you're concerned about forest fires, let's say. You're the California Department of Parks, and you understand when fires start, and you're trying to control them. And then one day, God says, let's change the Earth's atmosphere. From 20% oxygen, let's make it 60% oxygen, just for fun. Let's just see what happens. And of course, if the Earth's atmosphere suddenly converted to 60% oxygen, everything would go up. I mean, everything would burn. Like, you couldn't stop forest fires. There would be fires everywhere. And my argument is that's kind of what happened to us socially. Imagine if anyone who had a gripe, someone cut you off, a restaurant gave you bad service, a politician said something you like. Imagine going back to people in 1980 or 1990 and saying, hey, what do you think if we give every person on the planet a megaphone to complain about everything they want to complain about? What do you think? Like, what a terrible idea. Like, what would life be like if everyone is griping all the time? And if we all have to live in fear of someone griping about us, because you never know when this gripe will go global. Like, it'll become like something that millions of people retweet. So my argument in the essay was, when we moved onto social media, when everyone got on, early 2010s is really when it spreads. When everyone got on, our political life, it was as though it wasn't like pouring gasoline. It was like pouring oxygen on. Everything will burn. If you have a spark, it'll blow up. And so I think that's what happened. And what that's done is it super empowered the far left and the far right. It super empowered Russian agents who have been messing with us since the 50s. Made it very easy for them to mess with us, and they've done a lot of it. Other countries are getting into it now because we make it so easy for them. So this is making us stupid. And the stupid word comes from, I coined a term in that essay called structural stupidity. Structural stupidity is what happens when you have smart people together, but you have a ban on anyone objecting to other people's ideas, and only on one side. So if someone proposes something more kind of radical and crazy on the left, and some more moderate person says, wait a second, that's going to backfire, that person gets canceled. That person has to shut up. So now you don't have dissenting voices on the left or the right. And when you don't have dissenting voices, when you crush dissent, you get stupidity. And that's what we've seen on university campuses since around 2014, 2015, a lot of stupidity.
And yet, you use examples in some talks that I've heard you give about asteroids. And if we had this big asteroid that we could recognize and it's hurtling toward Earth and we would all band together, why is it that we don't look at our current situation and say, wow, this is an asteroid that let's just band together and really address this? And we had an opportunity with COVID to perhaps say we have...
Sort of.
So what's going on? So you say sort of. What's going on there?
So human nature is such that if there's a foreign invasion, it's like there's a button on our forehead that says, in case of foreign invasion, break glass and you will have all kinds of patriotic impulses. People come together. So Pearl Harbor did that. 9/11 did that. Now, in Pearl Harbor, it led to the war, which led to the greatest generation. With 9/11, we had a few weeks of it. But then, in my opinion, George W. Bush hijacked it for his agenda on fighting Iraq, and we didn't maximize what could have been. It became divisive. But it could have worked back then. If we had 9/11 today, I don't know that it would work. Now, you mentioned COVID. Historically, diseases and pandemics do not bring people together. Think about it this way. In ancient Rome, there were a number of plagues swept through. Is that going to unite Romans with each other? To fight who? It's just the opposite. There's a shortage of goods. Everyone is dangerous. And in our COVID response, we had this huge, horrible overreaction in America. We told kids, don't go near other children. They'll give you COVID. Don't play outside with them. They'll give you COVID. None of that was true. But we got everyone afraid of everyone. And people had to wear masks as though, if people breathe on you, they'll give you a disease. So don't get close to people. So, the early COVID, there was definitely some coming together. We saw some signs of that. But it quickly got politicized by both sides. Trump politicized it, but also a lot of the scientific community politicized it. It's on the left. So, COVID did not bring us together. It actually, of course, over time, much further divided us. It was one of the big left-right divides was COVID maximalists on the left who are still wearing masks today, and COVID deniers on the right who think the vaccines didn't save lives.
John, you create a very dire picture. Structural stupidity, the impacts of social media that oxygenate the tensions that we have right now, the decline of religion, the rise of a politicized ideology, left or right. All right, you got to give us a little hope here. Like, what are some ways to navigate this situation that we're in?
Yeah. So the trends are really bad. The hope I can give is this. Historically, in America, there are 80-year cycles. And one generation, so there's an internet meme that really helps explain it. It actually goes back thousands of years. A number of scholars over thousands of years have noticed this. But the meme is this. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. And then you repeat and repeat and repeat. That's 4 generations. Howe and Strauss have a book, The Fourth Turning, about this 4-generation cycle. And in America, it's every 80 years. Now, all the other ones have been a major war. So you have the Revolutionary War, and you have this amazing generation. I mean, this incredible generation of brilliant men coming out of it, who created these institutions. Took some tuning, but they gave us good institutions. But then they decay, and you get corruption. And by the 1850s, things are terrible. And of course, we then have the Civil War, which is the greatest conflagration we've ever had. And out of that come new institutions, new dynamism. We get incredible prosperity in the late 19th century. But that begins to decay also. 80 years after 1850 takes us to 1930. Now we're the Great Depression. Looks like liberalism and free markets aren't working. Communism might be better, people think. And we end up with World War II, which again renews not just the citizens, but our institutions. And then you go from 1930, 80 years takes you to 2010. And as I keep saying, something changed in the early 2010s. And it's something that I think is not compatible with our current form of liberal democracy. Does that mean things are going to keep going down and down forever? No. Humans are inventive. We have these cycles. So I think we'll come out of it eventually. My fear, though, is that the previous cycles all turned on a major war. And that could do it for us. There could be other ways to do it. But it's not an easy thing that we can get out of just by resolving to be nicer to each other. There are structural factors that are sort of draining away our social capital, our trust, our ability to work together. So we have to I'm not sure what we do, frankly, at the global level. At the local level, this would be my advice. At the local level, create strong communities. This is what gives us protection, meaning, friendship. Think more locally. Politics used to be much more local. Now everyone is arguing about Congress and national stuff. But I think our local communities are still very humane, mostly healthy, not always. So don't pull your hair out over what's happening in Washington necessarily. Just try to make your community better. And I think this goes especially for religious communities. You have moral resources, you have possibilities far beyond what secular communities can really achieve.
The cycle, the 80-year cycle, is really intriguing. And if we are at this kind of inflection point at the end of an 80-year cycle, the prospect of having a new generation that arises that is innovative, creative, whether it's precipitated by war or we have a positive rather than a negative precipitating factor, which I'm hoping and praying that it doesn't require a war for ingenuity to encourage to step forward. But it seems to me there's a factor that you've been exploring that makes this particular inflection point more challenging. And that's the whole impact of social media on this younger generation that might be the generation to do this creative, courageous work of reinvention, but now are saddled in some particular ways. Is that an accurate?
No, that's right. And that's one of the main reasons for my pessimism is that normally we would hope that the young generation will pull us out of this. We made mistakes. We messed up our democracy. Gen Z, those born after 1995, they bear no blame for what's happening to us. But what I found, beginning with my last book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and then through the current one, The Anxious Generation, is that kids who were born after 1995, Gen Z, they're very, very different, and in ways that are likely to make them less successful, less innovative, less creative. So the millennials, if you're born between 1981 and 1995, you grew up with the internet, but it was the early internet, which was amazing. And it was decentralized, and it wasn't about money and exploitation, and you could find information, and it was fun. And you had a slow dial-up connections. There was no video. So the millennials grew up with the internet, and they're fine. Their mental health is fine. And they had flip phones. They used them to text and call each other, and their mental health is fine. And then between 2010 and 2015, everything changes. So in 2010, suppose you're a 12-year-old kid. Let's make it. It's okay. So suppose you're a 12-year-old kid in the year 2000, and you have a sister who's 4 years older than you. Your sister went through puberty with a flip phone and no Instagram, no smartphone, no front-facing camera, no high-speed internet. Your sister used her flip phone to text her friends to say, let's meet at 3, and then they would meet at 3. So your sister's mental health is fine. But let's say you're a 12-year-old girl in 2010, about to start puberty, and that's the year that instead of you getting a flip phone, your dad gets you a smartphone. And that's also the year that the smartphone gets a front-facing camera. And that's also that Instagram is founded. And in 2012 is when you probably got an account, because that's when Facebook buys Instagram. So you as a 12-year-old girl, you're going through puberty, posting your face, posting your body, having people comment on your face and body. It grows to take up 5 to 10 hours a day of your time. Our kids now, half of them say they're online almost constantly. So they're constantly consuming content. They're constantly posting and commenting on posts. What that means is that if you went through puberty online in that way, in this great rewiring of childhood, that means that pushed out almost everything else. Imagine, for older listeners, think of all the time you spent playing with friends. Cut that by 70%. Take out 70% of that. Imagine all the time you spent outside in sunshine. Take out 70% of that. Imagine all the books you read. Knock almost all of those out. There's no time. Gen Z is not able to read books. So we've had this great rewiring of childhood. And because puberty is so important, Gen Z didn't get, you only get one childhood, you only get one puberty. Gen Z didn't get a normal human puberty. They spent it largely scrolling. The boys were on video games and pornography. The girls were on social media. And everyone's watching these 15-second videos. That tends to take up all of your consciousness. And the signs are so far, according to business people I talk with, that their young employees are more fragile, more anxious. They're not less intelligent. Gen Z is as intelligent as any generation, but their ability to focus, their ability to have what's called executive function, to sort of define a task, stay on task, and do what you need to do to complete the task, that has been shattered in many of them. And what that means is that we're not likely to see, my fear is we're not going to have another Steve Jobs. There's not going to be another great person who accomplishes great things. They don't have the attention span. They don't have the ability to focus. And most of them, because they have to spend 5 to 10 hours a day just consuming content, there isn't any other time, so they can't really do anything. So until we break that, we have to roll back the phone-based childhood. In my book, I propose 4 norms. I'll just list them, and then we can talk about them. But if we do these 4 things, which cost nothing, we can largely roll back this problem. Norm number 1, no smartphone before high school. We've got to clear this out of early puberty. Kids can't go through early puberty on a phone and constantly swiping. No social media before 16. 16 is the minimum. Social media is wildly inappropriate for children. We usually have age limits when something involves sex, violence, addiction, or danger. And social media brings all of those to our kids. So it's incredible to me that 10-year-olds can go anywhere they want on the internet. The third norm is phone-free schools. There's no way kids can concentrate when they have the world's greatest distraction device in their pockets. They don't talk to each other very much. Because in between classes, they're on their phones. At lunch, they're on their phones. So we're losing the ability for them to learn or socialize at school. So that has to stop, and that is stopping. Lots of states are going phone-free in their schools now, thank God. And the fourth norm is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. Because if we've got to roll back the phone-based childhood, but then we have to give them back a real human childhood, the way most older people had, where you're outside playing with your friends. You have the independence to do things with your friends. You don't always have a chaperone, an adult, making decisions for you and judging risk for you. So if we do those four things, I think we can roll this back. But if we don't, then I think we'll continue that every additional year of births is going to churn out kids who are much less than they would have been. They're going to end up much less than they would have been if we'd given them a normal human childhood with adventure.
John, why don't we connect some of the dots here? It seems to me that these are not two separate conversations we've had. The A conversation about political polarization, the fragmentation of our society, and the B conversation about the impacts of social media on particularly younger generation. They seem to have some tethering together, but can you do that for us? I mean, what is the tether, and will solutions in one area help in the other area, vice versa?
Yeah. Okay, let me try. So it is sometimes said that culture is upstream from politics. And we've certainly seen this in America, the culture war. Our politics is shaped by the culture war. But it's often also said that technology is upstream from culture. So when the automobile let's start with the telegraph. When the telegraph was introduced, information could travel instantly for the first time in history. Before then, it was limited to the speed of a horse or a train. So that led to all kinds of sociological changes that I haven't studied. I don't know what they were. But each time you get a new technology, you get radio that reconfigures a lot of things, and family life is around the radio. You get television, family life is around the television. You get when you get the computer, it didn't change things at first, but once you get the internet and the computer, the home computer, then it begins to change in the 90s. So technological change comes in. Every time it comes in, there are alarmists who say this is going to ruin everything. This is going to hurt the kids. But over a few decades, we adapt to it. We're a very adaptive species. We're a very creative species. And so, like automobiles, when they first came in, or airplanes, they killed a lot of people. And eventually we decided, how about if we don't let children drive? You have to be 16. How about if we mandate seatbelts? How about if we have traffic lights? So over time, we regulated these new technologies to the point where we could get the good and not as much of the bad. But that doesn't happen anymore, because the technology is coming in so fast, the changes are coming so fast that we can't adapt to them. The social media era, it really began in 2012. I mean, obviously Facebook goes back to 2004, 2003, but it really gets its current form, all these platforms, around 2012 to 2015. That's the era. That's just 10 years ago. And we in the scientific community can't even figure it out. I'm in a debate with other scholars who say, no, there's no evidence that this is harming kids. So we can't get the facts in 10 years. It takes a lot longer. We can't get, how many laws we've passed to protect kids or to regulate the internet since 1997? Zero. Nothing. There's been nothing. No regulation of any kind in 20 years. So I think change is happening so fast now that we're not able to adapt to it. And AI is going to come in even faster. So we are in big trouble because the technology, we started our conversation talking about the way we create these communities. And in the Righteous Mind, I talk about moral matrices, like the movie The Matrix. We gradually create, so the movie The Matrix, if listeners haven't seen it, it's from a novel by William Gibson, and the Matrix is a consensual hallucination implemented on computers in the movie and in the book. But you plug into it, and then you're in this imagined world. Well, that's a great metaphor for society, because that really is what society is. It's, what we're doing now, all the things, this is all a consensual hallucination. Very little of this is made of atoms. This is all about meanings. So we create these consensual hallucinations, and we live in them. And some are better than others. But if the pace of change is so fast that we can't really create one anymore, we can't create a consensual hallucination. It's just little bits of meaning, a little community here, a group, a network group here. And so once again, I'm brought to the idea that for now, I think we really need to focus on having healthy, strong local communities, and that especially includes religious communities. I think that's a way to adapt. I have a vision of a future in which I used to love the internet. I thought it was going to transform society for the better in the 90s. There is a vision of democracy in the internet age that is wonderful. In theory, the internet should give us the best democracy ever. Everyone has a voice. Information is instant. But something's going wrong with the business model, with the technology. Something's going wrong that we're not getting the. I mean, obviously there are some gains, but I think the costs and the risks now actually outweigh the gains. Not for technology in general, but for social media in particular. And I fear the same may be true for AI. We don't know yet.
John, as we bring this to a close, you've talked about the impact that community on the local level has. And you've talked also about the importance of religious communities in particular. If you have a word for religious communities in this particular moment, given the political polarization, given the impacts of social media on younger generations, given the pace of technological change, what is the word of exhortation that you would have to a religious community, and specifically to the church?
Yeah, it's roll back the phone-based childhood, and here's why. I've had several conversations with Christian podcasters, and we've talked about the importance of going phone-free in your schools, and a couple of them have said they've tried raising this topic, but they're getting a lot of pushback. And I'm surprised because I would think Christian communities would be the most receptive to saying, no, we've got to keep kids off the phones and social media. But they're like, the pastors are afraid of riling up the parents. Some parents would object. I'm not sure of the reasons, but I was surprised that there wasn't a lot of uptake. Let me give you the example that I'm most familiar with, which is Jewish communities. So I gave a talk in December organized by Tikva, and it was the heads of about 50 Jewish day schools came. And I laid out my argument about what smartphones and social media is doing to kids, blocking their development, blocking their spiritual development. You can't learn to be forgiving. You can't be present. You can't be still. You can't open your heart to God. All these things are blocked by a life that's constantly spent scrolling and consuming 15-second videos. So smartphones are blockers of spiritual development. And so what I came to realize in these conversations with Christian interviewers was that if you're concerned about spiritual development, about the growth of their soul, about the development of religious practices that will stand them in good stead, you have to get the kids off of smartphones first. You can't really do anything. Boys in particular, they're so hooked on video games and pornography, their brains adapt to high stimulation. When they're sitting in church, it is painfully boring. Now, it might have been boring for you. Synagogue was boring for me when I was a kid, but it's much more painful for kids today, especially boys, because their brains have adapted to very, very high levels of stimulation. So it doesn't matter what you say in church on Sunday, because the boys can't pay any attention to it. So you're just wasting your breath for the most part. So to return to the Jewish communities, they sprung into action. I gave this talk in December. Then we had a follow-up session, a working session in, I think, January, February. And now, of these 50 schools, I think the majority have now come up with new phone policies. They've almost all gone phone-free. Like you can bring a phone to school, but you have to lock it up on the beginning. You get it back at the end. A lot of them are going beyond the invisible boundary of the school. That is, schools usually have control of what happens in school, but they're reluctant to tell parents what you should do at home. Not anymore. They're saying to parents, please do not give your child a smartphone before high school. Some of them have mandated it. Some of these Jewish schools are saying, you cannot, this is a rule, you cannot give your child a smartphone. You can give a flip phone, a phone watch, but it can't be an internet-connected phone until high school. So these are communities that are springing into action around the schools where everyone's mobilized for the welfare of the kids. I spoke at there's a Sephardic Jewish community in New York. They're like based in Brooklyn, so they know each other. They have a set of schools and synagogues. And then in the summer, they got to Deal, New Jersey, and they have this beautiful cultural center. The kids can hang out. Everyone can, you can have fun, be independent. It's on the beach. So I guess this is why I keep focusing on how you can do this. Like in a religious community, you can have a community of, I have no idea how many people, 10,000, 50,000, I don't know how many it is, but many thousands of people can live a healthy, they're giving their kids a healthy childhood. And now it's possible to talk about spiritual development and education. Now it's possible for a kid to sit in class and actually listen for 20 minutes at a time. So that, I guess, would be my advice. You've got to roll back the phone-based childhood. Unless you do that, there's not much hope of reaching through to your kids.
John, thank you. You've given us not only a lot of information, but you've given us seeds that we can plant for transformation, and deeply appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Walter. I hope that listeners, if you want more, I hope you'll go to anxiousgeneration.com. That's the website for the movement. We have a lot of resources there for parents and teachers and for teenagers as well. Also, please follow along. I have a Substack. It's free, afterbabel.com. So I think we now live in the post-Babel world where it's very hard to understand each other. So at afterbabel.com, and we have some beautiful writing there by a British woman named Freya India, a young woman, on spiritual elevation and degradation. We're beginning to move into religious themes as well as the hardcore research.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Walter.